Okay, it's Friday, September 23rd. We're going to talk about casualties. We're going to talk about referendum and mobilization. And you want to stay with me to the end because we're going to also have fun with Russian state media. Okay, so the first thing that we want to talk about is this. The losses of the Russian occupiers for the day amounted to 550 people of military personnel, 18 tanks, and etc. They go on, one aircraft, one helicopter, and they go on. Now that's really interesting because that's pretty high. I don't know what the casualties on the other side are, but it's still nothing. And that is a high estimate for how many Russians were killed in a day, but it's still nothing compared to September 11th, where the Russians were claiming that 4,000 pro-Kiev troops were killed over 5 days, which means 800 a day while they were fleeing, which didn't make any sense at all. Now, I went over, I saw this today as well, which is President Zelensky said that in the war, Ukraine loses about 50, that when they talk about loses, they're talking about 50 killed, 50 of its servicemen every day. That's exactly my math. I did this a few days ago. How many Russians dead, how many dead Russians? I did the math. Please look that up. That video will show you the American estimate. I did look at the spreadsheet. I did the American estimate, the British estimate, the Ukrainian estimate, and the Russian estimate, just so you could see what different groups were saying about it. Okay, let's go to Twitter and talk about the what's going on here. Ukrainian forces assault the town of Lyman. Now that might be why there were so many casualties, because I'm pretty sure the Russians are told, hold this spot, even if it's a bad spot, and then they just do it because there's not really a leadership structure that scaffolds where they can make decisions above high command. In the last 3 days, Ukrainian forces have secured bridgeheads on the east bank of the Oskil River in Kharkiv. They've attacked the town of Lyman. Ukraine is now putting pressure on the territory that it considers essential to its war aims. So I think that might be why we're seeing this number of 550 in the day, although it might be, that Ukraine's getting bloody nose in the process. I just don't know. Okay, let's turn our attention now to the mobilization effort. The Russian mobilization system is struggling to execute the task Russian President Vladimir Putin set, and will likely fail to produce mobilized reserve forces unless the Kremlin can rapidly fix the fundamental systemic problems. Okay, so they're having a hard time with drafting people. Beyond the hard time just processing, they have other issues. Russian pro-mill bloggers and social media users are raising concerns about unlawful mobilization practices, including older men. I saw a guy that was 52 that was drafted. Students, employees of military industries, and civilians with no prior military experience, that's supposed to be no, it's supposed to be reservists, are receiving illegal mobilization notices. A little bit further, divergences from the mobilization decree and Putin's and Shoigu's statements are also causing anger and mistrust toward Russian federal subjects and the Kremlin itself. But what do you expect was going to happen? They could be pro-war all day long as it didn't affect them. Disparate mobilization processes across different regions may exacerbate social tensions already raised by perceived inequalities. So there are different ethnicities within Russia, and it's hitting certain ones at a disproportionate rate. So we're going to see how this is all going to play out. Okay, in the meantime, let's look at this. Across Russia, Putin's mobilization seeps deeper into anxious society. It's really having an effect on the population. In some regions, men are driven off in buses with wives, mothers, and sisters sobbing openly, waving goodbye. It's nothing abnormal, but they weren't expecting this. The order is also already showing signs of transforming Russian society in a way not seen in generations, putting the country on a war footing, even as the Kremlin resists word war. Now, one of the reasons that they were not expecting this was because all this time they had this happy talk from management saying, no, everything's going great. It's a special military operation. We're crushing the Ukrainians. We just killed 4,000 in the last 5 days. They keep doing the same thing again and again by lying, and that's what some of the disconnect is. Now this is really interesting. The 300,000 figure may turn out to be a smokescreen for a much larger target figure. Novaya Gazette Europe, reconfigured outside the country after being shuttered by authorities, reported on September 22nd that a classified clause listed in Putin's mobilization order envisioned up to 1 million people being drafted. Aha. So that would make sense of why you're seeing so many people that are being drafted when you didn't think it was that. Somebody asked me this in the live stream that I did, question and answer session, about did you see clause 7? And so I looked at the actual draft order, but apparently they redacted a certain portion of it, and that might have been what that was. This is a classified clause now that they may be drafting up to 1 million. So they might be saying 300,000 and actually doing 3 times plus that in order to actually. So that signals that Putin's still all in on this. He doesn't think that he's going to stop anytime soon. Okay, next. I talked about how it's easy for them to be pro-war when it's not affecting them. This is the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, My Country, Right or Wrong, Russian Public Opinion. I talked about this on September 7th. I think it was on September 7th. Opinion polls consistently show that a majority of respondents support the actions of the Russian forces in Ukraine. In June 2022, 47% of Russians definitely supported the actions of the Russian military. Another 28% said that they mostly supported them. That's 75%. 3 and 4 support what they call a special operation. It's a war. Okay, this makes sense to them because, as various participants outlined, it's not like we're taking anything that isn't ours. We're liberating Ukraine from Nazis and fascists. That's what Vladimir Putin called it, and I trust him. Okay, so this is what it looks like in March. How much, like, look at these two categories, blue and teal together, and it hasn't really shifted a whole lot. Okay, from March to June, it's still pretty consistent and still in the single digits on people who definitely oppose the war or are not sure, largely in single digits. Okay, so that's where we are with support, and this is going to change radically in the next poll. That's my prediction. Okay, next. While they're not happy about being drafted, they're also racing across the border to the point that Finland had to significantly restrict border crossings. Border guards were saying that this has doubled the number of crossings over the previous day. So that's a good barometer of the sentiment of the Russian people toward the war. 4 occupied Ukraine regions begin to vote on joining Russia. Okay, so there's referendums that will cover 15% of the country. 20%, if you include Crimea, would be Russian territory, or almost a little over 20%. It was decided not to hold electronic voting and use traditional paper ballots, partly because it's easier to stuff paper ballots. Authorities will go door to door for the first 4 days to collect votes. Go door to door, and they're going door to door asking, do you want to join Russia, with soldiers there? I mean, if you think I'm joking, I'm not. I'm going to show you a video clip in a moment. Votes are seen as an escalation of the 7th-month war. Why? Because incorporation would allow Moscow to claim that it's defending its own territory. I've said this for the last couple of weeks now. If this happens, then it's Russia now, and if you attack that, then you're the aggressor. We just want peace. We want peace after we stole the land, and we don't want you to take it back. This is all declared Russian territory. They can declare that this is a direct attack on Russia, so they can fight without any reservations, and they can declare a full-out war. It's all a sham. There will be no independent observers, and what could go wrong with no independent observers? In the eastern Donetsk and Luhansk regions, residents will have to answer the question, do you support Russia, the Republic's entry into Russia? That's it. That's the question. And Kherson, and Zaporizhia, it's a little bit more complex. Are you in favor of secession from Ukraine? Formation of an independent state by the region, and it's joining the Russian Federation as a subject of the Russian Federation. And so that's what's in there. Okay, I told you, I promised you, this is a 15-second clip of what they're seeing on the ground there.
Of ballots appears to be underway. Images showing that in multiple areas. It's important to point out that this is happening under wartime conditions, under the gun certainly, and that these ballot boxes are being taken to people's homes. Essentially, an occupying force going to your front door and saying, do you want to vote yes to join part of Russia or not? Pretty clear what the outcome would be. As they used to say in the Soviet time, it doesn't really matter who votes, it's who counts the votes. Well, we may not even...
Okay, so that's all I needed to show you there, so you understand what the referendum's like. So if any of your friends are arguing, oh no, it's all fair and free, sure it is. Okay, why bother voting? Apathy in Ukraine amid so-called referendums. And I'm not even going to go into this article, but there were like what's the point? It's all baked in anyway. We all know what's going to happen, and you'll see that when we get to fun with RT. Okay, so what's interesting though is that world opinion is shifting against Russia, and some of the non-aligned countries that were, sitting off on the side are actually starting to take a position against Russia because they're recognizing what's going on. And even before that, the Chinese and Indian leaders were kind of gently rebuking Russia, but now there's actually a bigger shift, and even countries like Brazil. Brazil is one of the BRICS, and Brazil is getting a sweet deal on Russian oil. Even Brazil is talking about it. China and India are following up, complaining about the global food and energy shortages, and the territorial, going in there and doing that to another country's territory is not okay. So it's happening. Okay, let's turn our attention last. Fun with Russian state media. Okay, so Donbas Republic, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions kick off the vote in Russia. Referendums on officially becoming Russian territories have begun. The votes will take place from today until Tuesday. Preliminary results are expected to be released on Wednesday. But what they didn't say was, we already wrote the results. I mean, it's already baked in, and we know that. Nobody is surprised by this at all. People have gathered across Russia to support the referendums. Here's a video. What they don't show are any of the protests. They're just showing people standing there waving flags, but they're not showing any of the protests. There are protests in at least 38 or 39 cities. I'm not sure which. More than 1,000 people arrested protesting, and to their credit, they're protesting because that means like legit jail time, not like just I'm protesting and I have my freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of speech. Okay, Donbas referendums will change security reality, says Moscow, and I told you this is what was going to happen, and they're confirming this here. Moscow will treat any potential attacks on Donbas, as well as Kherson and Zaporozhye regions after the referendums on joining Russia, as attacks on its own territory, which means it's like as if you fired a missile into Moscow. Okay, he said Dmitry Peskov has confirmed. Whether other areas would be treated as Russian land, definitely. Dmitry Medvedev warned that Russia would not hesitate to use all means available to defend its territory, and encroachment on Russian territory is a crime. Well, so is stealing your neighbor's land, but we'll look the other way on that one. By the way, last thing I'm going to talk about, if you would like to know, I have the spreadsheet here about the actual Russian casualties in Ukraine, please look at this video because I lay everything out systematically about the American, the British, the Russian, the Ukrainian figures, and it'll help you understand what the casualty rate actually is. Thank you for your time. I'll talk to you tomorrow.